Have you ever wondered if the biggest heist in history required a single gun? Most assume it takes masked men, heavy explosives, and a reinforced vault. But in the modern age, the most lethal weapon is a tax code. In 2005, the European Union launched an ambitious project, the carbon credit. It was a digital market designed to save the planet. If a factory polluted, it paid. If a green company innovated, it earned. It was meant to be the future of global ecology. But the bureaucrats in Brussels made one fatal, catastrophic mistake. They treated intangible, digital data like physical gold. They built a structure of immense value, but ignored the reality of how digital assets move. By failing to secure the ledger, they transformed a tool for environmental salvation into a playground for the bold. They assumed the complexity of their system was its own defense. They were wrong. The system did not just invite exploitation, it practically begged for it. A door was left wide open, and the locks were made of paper. The foundation was set for a crime that would move at the speed of light, leaving no physical trace behind, only the hollowed-out remains of a national treasury. The light in the back room of the Parisian bar was dim, smelling of stale tobacco and cheap coffee. Character_2 were not analysts. They were gamblers, used to reading tells and calculating odds in the blink of an eye. Their lives revolved around the spin of a wheel or the flip of a card. But that night, the game changed. Spread across the table were not poker chips, but the sprawling, dense text of the new EU carbon credit regulations. They read the fine print until their eyes burned. The law was specific. Cross-border trades of these digital credits were entirely tax-exempt to encourage trade. Yet, domestic sales within France were slapped with a 19.6% value-added tax. It was a discrepancy in the ledger, a structural fracture. One man tapped the paper with a steady finger. The realization rippled through the room. They weren't looking at a financial regulation anymore. They were looking at a vacuum, a way to move money across borders and pretend it had been taxed when it never had been. The poker faces stayed, but the intent turned icy. They had spent their lives searching for the house edge. Now, they had found it in the heart of the European treasury. The cards were put away. The real game had begun. They built a carousel of ghosts. First, they registered shell companies in the Netherlands, buying carbon credits in massive, tax-free batches. Then, they pinged these credits across the border to their French entities. Within the blink of an eye, the French shell sold those credits to a legitimate buyer, collecting the 19.6% value-added tax. But the money never touched the government. It was redirected, split, and funneled through a labyrinth of accounts in Cyprus and Hong Kong. No warehouses, no cargo ships, no physical product, just lines of code blinking across fiber optic cables. The cycle took milliseconds. They repeated it until the system groaned under the weight of the phantom trades. For every 100 million cycled, 20 million in pure, untraceable profit vanished into their pockets. It was a digital siphon, draining the French treasury in real time. They watched the numbers climb on their monitors, thousands of euros turning into millions, and then into billions. The ledger was being rewritten by the very people it was designed to regulate. They were no longer gamblers in a back room. They were architects of a financial ghost ship, sailing through the heart of the European economy without leaving a single footprint. Overnight, the hustlers became billionaires. The low-lit back rooms of Paris were replaced by the sun-drenched coast of Tel Aviv and the neon glare of Las Vegas. They traded their anonymity for super yachts, fleets of custom hypercars, and parties that cost more than a small town earns in a year. But the scent of illicit billions travels fast. The massive, unexplained influx of cash acted like a flare in the dark, drawing the eyes of the French-Israeli mafia. The shift was immediate. The luxury they had sought became a cage. Every knock at the door, every unfamiliar car parked across the street, every shadow in the rearview mirror turned into a potential threat. Paranoia spread through the crew like a virus. They had bought the world, but they had lost the ability to sleep. Their homes were guarded by men with heavy hands, and their phones became instruments of suspicion. The dream of eternal wealth fractured under the weight of constant surveillance. They were no longer the predators of the financial system. They had become the prey of a much more violent, unforgiving machine. The air in their hotel suites grew heavy with the realization that they were being hunted. The paranoia reached its breaking point when the money began to vanish from the inside. Accusations flew between the architects of the scheme, turning former partners into bitter rivals. They stopped meeting in public. They stopped trusting their own shadows. Then, the silence of the boardroom was shattered by the sound of gunfire on a Parisian street. Sami Soweid, the man who had mapped the loophole and built the empire, stepped out of a vehicle in broad daylight. A motorcycle pulled alongside him. The rider did not hesitate. The muffled pop of a suppressed pistol echoed, and Soweid collapsed onto the pavement. It was not a warning. It was an execution. Within hours, the news filtered through the remaining members of the crew. The message was unmistakable. The era of the digital heist was over, replaced by a brutal, international blood feud. Bodies began appearing in the trunks of cars across the city, displaying signs of torture that had nothing to do with finance. The green energy market, once a beacon of environmental progress, had been hijacked by the underworld. It was no longer about carbon credits or tax returns. It was a war for territory, fought with steel and lead in the heart of Europe. The bloodshed in the streets finally forced the hand of the state. Intelligence agencies, previously blinded by the sheer speed of the digital transactions, began tracing the flow of funds from the shell companies back to the source. The European Union Emergency Committee met in closed session and officially shuttered the tax-exempt status for carbon credits. The loophole that had fueled a billion-euro empire vanished with the stroke of a pen. Across France and Israel, the raids began at dawn. Specialized units broke down doors, seizing encrypted laptops and hard drives that held the keys to the entire carousel. There was no resistance. The masterminds were pulled from their luxury suites, hands zip-tied behind their backs, and hauled into the back of armored vans. The trial that followed was a clinical dismantling of their operation. Prosecutors presented the ledger of the theft, 5 billion euros, siphoned from the public coffers, gone into a void of offshore accounts. The figures were displayed on massive screens in the courtroom, showing the sheer scale of the plunder. The Carbon Kings were sentenced to years behind bars, their wealth frozen, and their yachts seized. The coffers remained empty. The damage was absolute. The prison cells are now their only world, but the lesson of the Carbon Kings echoes far beyond those walls. They proved a terrifying truth about our digital existence. When governments build complex ledgers to solve global crises, they often leave the door wide open for those who know how to read the fine print. It took no explosives. It took no masked men. It took only a few people with calculators and a complete lack of conscience to dismantle the most sophisticated security system in the region. They turned an environmental dream into a 5 billion euro nightmare. We are left to ask, was this a victimless crime against a faceless government, or a cold-blooded betrayal that cost human lives? The digital age provides the tools for progress, but it also provides the architecture for chaos. Every line of code, every cross-border transaction, and every automated ledger is a potential front line. If a handful of hustlers can redirect billions through a simple tax loophole, what happens when the next generation finds a bigger flaw? The systems are faster, the data is denser, and the stakes have never been higher. The heist is over, but the vulnerability remains. Watch the ledger. Someone else is already looking for the next door to open.